What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.
Good morning. The first item of business is general questions, and question number 1, I call Ruth Maguire.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it's taking to support families whose children have died as a result of illegal drugs.
Cabinet Secretary Keith Brown.
Obviously, every drug-related death is a tragedy, and I offer my condolences to any family impacted by this issue. As part of our national mission to reduce drug deaths and to improve the lives of people affected, we published our framework to improve holistic support for families affected by substance use. This is supported by an investment of £3.5 million per year to alcohol and drug partnerships and £3 million per year to vital third sector organisations. In addition to this, we provide third sector organisation Scottish families affected by alcohol and drugs £160,000 per year to provide national services to support families, including bereavement support.
Ruth Maguire.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Grace Handling was 13 when she died. The individual who supplied the ecstasy that killed her was charged with culpable homicide, but much to the distress of her family was acquitted after the jury returned a not proven verdict. Would the Cabinet Secretary meet with me and Grace's father, Stuart, to hear directly from him and provide some support and guidance on ways forward?
Cabinet Secretary.
The case that's been mentioned by the member is, of course, a tragedy, and my sympathies go to the family and friends of Grace. I think I'm right in saying that I've met with Grace's father, amongst others, previously, but I would, of course, be happy to meet both with Ruth Maguire and Mr Handling to discuss the suggested reform in this area. I should say, first of all, that not proven is something the Government is committed to abolishing in terms of the verdict, and that will come before Parliament very soon. And in relation to the point about the homicide law, I would say the Scottish Law Commission is currently looking at how homicide law operates more generally, and I would encourage views on how this specific area of law could be reassessed as part of that wider look at homicide law to be passed at the Law Commission as well. And happy, once that has come back to the Government, to have that discussion with the member and the individual concerned.
Sue Webber.
Thank you. I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary will agree that providing support for young people affected by drugs remains a key component of the Scottish Drugs Mission. In January, the Scottish Government provided £5.5 million for new programmes for children and families, including the expansion of Roots, a young person's support group run by Scottish families affected by drugs. Currently, Roots is only available in East and West and Bartonshire. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide any detail on when this programme will be expanded and in what areas will these services be offered?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I say no, I can't provide that information at this time, but I understand the member will want to have that information, so I'm happy to speak to the Minister responsible, Angela Constance, and make sure she provides a full account of that to the member.
Holocaine.
Presiding Officer, each drug's death is a tragedy for the family left behind, and particularly for parents who lose their child. Again this week we've seen suspected drugs deaths at their highest recorded number in a single quarter since 2021. Public health experts have stated that data is vitally important in tackling the crisis, but the Public Audit Committee of this Parliament has said there is significant risk that the scale of the problem is not being properly captured or understood. Data collection must be robust in order to support people and their families, so I would ask the Cabinet Secretary what steps are the Government taking to improve the quality of data collection in relation to the use of drugs, particularly potent new drugs which may account for the spike in the last quarter of 2022.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, just to help the member if I can, first of all, to say that in 2021, 70 people aged 20 or under suffered a drug death, which, as the member says, represents 70 individuals, each of one of which is a tragedy, both for the individual but for the family concerned. It does represent a reduction of 10 from the previous year, but it's still far too high. And there's also been a recent decline in deaths in those aged 25 and under. As I say, though, any deaths in that age group are a real concern to everybody, including the Government. In relation to the data that's concerned, I think before we agree data streams, we do so with the professionals. The Government can get criticised quite rightly for being too close to formulating the criteria for which data is collected. But I'm happy to pass on his request to the Minister concerned, Angela Constance, and make sure a response comes back to the member with more detail.
Question number 2, Graeme Dey.
Thank you, President Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it ensures that key sectors such as engineering are allocated sufficient numbers of modern apprentices.
Minister Jamie Hepburn.
Apprenticeships support key sectors while providing employment and take account of demographic change and seek to respond to employer demand. The modern apprenticeship demand assessment comprises 3 phases. The first establishes a robust evidence baseline, sourcing and collating strategic and contextual data. The second draws on the baseline to support consultation with industry and verify demand. In the final phase, the evidence baseline and consultation insight are analysed and a final assessment produced to inform the modern apprenticeship contracting strategy. As such, the number of starts in each occupational grouping attempts to reflect employer demand and be managed in line with Scottish Government priorities.
Graeme Dey.
The Minister is well aware of the fine work done by the Angus Training Group in my constituency, having visited them with me some time back, and I know he'll be pleased to learn they're experiencing an upturn in demand from employers. Unfortunately, however, they have a contract volume figure of 31, a rollover from the pandemic this year, when they have the potential to be taking at least 40 modern apprentices. Can I ask whether there's any scope for having that number increased through the prioritisation of engineering as a key sector?
Minister.
Well, let me first reflect the fact I have been able to visit the Angus Training Group with Graeme Dey, and I was very impressed with the work they're doing on engineering overall. I'm happy to say that the latest statistics published for Q3 of this year show an increase in the number of starts in engineering and related occupational groupings, 1,658 compared to the equivalent period last year, 1,256. So there's positive growth overall. I understand the challenges that Angus Training Group might be facing. Of course, we don't seek to micromanage that process. What I would say is that we'll recognise the importance of engineering to the economy. I would encourage the Angus Training Group to speak to SDS about increased demand and see if there's a way forward with them.
Question number 3, Michael Marra.
To ask the Scottish Government what progress has been made in STEM teacher recruitment.
Cabinet Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville.
STEM teacher numbers are at their highest level since 2011. There are now 378 more STEM teachers than before the start of the pandemic in 2019. I'm committed to recruiting more teachers and recently set out measures to Parliament, making it clear that we will provide £145.5 million in next year's budget to protect increased teacher numbers and support staff. Local authorities are responsible for the recruitment and deployment of their staff, and we will continue to do everything we can to help them maximise the number of jobs available for STEM teachers, including permanent posts.
Michael Marra.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for the answer, but our economy and our young people must have increased qualifications in vital science, technology, engineering and maths subjects. Yet the number of candidates is falling dramatically and targets for teacher recruitment are continuing to be missed. Almost half of available STEM bursaries for new teachers went unfilled this year. The body running the scheme has not been told by ministers whether these bursaries will continue. How on earth are they to recruit for the next academic year without a decision from ministers? So will the Cabinet Secretary confirm today whether that scheme will go ahead, and when will we have an effective national strategy that meets the scale of this challenge?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I pointed in my original answer, Presiding Officer, to the improvements that we have seen, but I do recognise we need to do more, and that's exactly why there are a number of working groups within the Scottish Government working with stakeholders to look at recruitment and retention, and particularly around the STEM teaching area. And I'm happy to confirm to Mr Marra today that, of course, the STEM bursaries will continue. This has been an important part of our policy to date and will continue in the next financial year.
Audrey Nicholl.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware of the Aberdeen Computer Collaborative that brings together Aberdeen City Council, the University of Aberdeen, the Robert Gordon University and NESCO, and it aims to raise the profile of computing science and make Aberdeen a destination of choice for computing science graduates entering teaching. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary how the Scottish Government is working with such collaboratives to build on this work and attract new graduates into computing science teaching?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I thank the member for highlighting the excellent work that's been undertaken by Aberdeen Computer Collaborative. This is a very important issue that we all work together on, and one of the key requirements of the Scottish Technology Ecosystem Review programme was to attract more graduates into teaching, especially women. That's why we formed the Scottish Teachers Advanced Computing Science Stacks, an organisation for and run by computing teachers, and I'm delighted to see that some of that work will be also including Aberdeen, and indeed a pilot scheme is being run on computing science teachers in advanced higher level to see what more we can do to improve and encourage teaching and teachers within this important subject.
Willie Rennie.
636 teaching posts were re-advertised last year. Many of them were in STEM subjects. One technical education teacher in Aberdeenshire was advertised 11 times. There is a big shortage. I don't get a sense of urgency from the Minister that she understands the scale of the problem. Can she reassure me she's on top of this?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I would be delighted at length to discuss with Mr Rennie the work that's going on with the Teacher Workforce Planning and Advisory Group and the Strategic Board for Teacher Education that is looking at recruitment and retention, not just in STEM, but across areas, and particularly around the area of geography as well, recognising that that is an issue. But for the shortage of time that I have in general questions, I'm happy to take that offline with Mr Rennie.
Thank you. Question number 4, Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it plans to dual the A90 between Ellon and Peterhead.
Minister Jenny Gilruth.
The second Strategic Transport Projects Review, the final report of which was published in December last year, did consider proposals to dual the A90 north of Ellon. However, after an extensive evidence-based process with substantial stakeholder and public consultation, dualling was not recommended. Instead, measures to improve road safety, reliability and adapting the trunk road network to deal with the challenge of climate change were considered.
Liam Kerr.
I thank the Minister for that answer, but 17 years after Alex Salmond promised the North East that the first decision he would make on becoming First Minister would be to dual between Ellon and Peterhead, there's nearly 2 decades of SNP inaction and lack of ambition on this forgotten road of Scotland, which has now seen 7 deaths and 49 injuries on this stretch in the last 3 years. So, Minister, for the safety and economy of the North East, and to show this is a government for more than just the Central Belt, will the Minister promise here and now to at last dual this section of the A90?
Minister.
I don't recognise some of the sentiment behind Mr Kerr's question. The Government has invested over £250 million in maintenance and road safety on the A90 since 2007 alone, so it's not true to characterise investment from this Government in that way. I do, however, recognise the members' interest in this route and, of course, the long-standing concerns regarding road safety. It is worth saying that there are some additional safety measures that have been introduced, including, of course, vehicle-activated signs. More broadly, the member will be aware that Nestrans, along with Aberdeenshire Council, have recently confirmed to Transport Scotland that they intend to take forward their own study of the A90, and of course ministers will consider that in detail. But I do reassure Liam Kerr that there are requirements to improve road safety on the trunk road network through SCPR2 recommendation 30, and that looks at provisions around about improving road safety more broadly.
Question number 5, Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it plans to increase employment opportunities within the pharmaceutical manufacturing sector in light of the recent Fraser of Allander report, the economic contribution of the pharmaceutical sector in Scotland.
Minister Richard Lockhead.
The Scottish Government recognises the importance of the pharmaceutical industry to the Scottish economy, including the creation of quality job opportunities across the country and also in rural and deprived regions as well. And later this year, Scotland's new innovation strategy will be published, focusing strongly on health technologies. And that will be an opportunity to boost R&D and create further job opportunities in the pharmaceutical and wider life sciences sector.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the Minister for that reply. In December, the Association of the British Pharmaceutical Industry and Life Science Companies shared their frustration at the UK Government's decision to increase voluntary scheme for branded medicine payments to 26.5% of sales, money retained by the Treasury. By contrast, Scottish ministers reinvest these payments in the New Medicines Fund for innovative new treatments. What impact has the NMF fund had on encouraging pharmaceutical manufacturing companies to invest in Scotland, given we allow health boards to purchase end-of-life, orphan and ultra-orphan medicines they may have struggled to justify financially before the fund was established in 2013?
Minister.
Well, currently the manufacturing of pharmaceuticals contributes just under £1.5 billion in GVA to Scotland, supporting a total of 11,350 full-time Scottish jobs, and the wider pharmaceutical sector supports over £1.7 billion in GVA. So clearly, since 2014-15, £465.5 million has been made available to health boards via the fund that the member refers to, which is dedicated to medicines for patients with rare diseases, via that New Medicines Fund, clearly that's playing a very, very important role. And in terms of going forward, we are aware there are concerns in the industry around the UK Government changes to branded medicines pricing. So the Scottish Government remains committed to investing the entire rebate from the voluntary scheme for branded medicines pricing access in that agreement into the New Medicines Fund going forward, and we will negotiate the successor scheme with the UK Government.
Question number 6, Sandesh Gulhani.
Thank you. Apologies, Presiding Officer, for being a few minutes late. I was stuck for almost 2 hours on the SNP nationalised ScotRail. To ask the Scottish Government how many civil servants are working in its... They don't seem to like that. To ask the Scottish Government how many civil servants...
Mr Gulhani, just for all members' information, it is important that you stick to the published text of the question. Please resume.
To ask the Scottish Government how many civil servants are working in its Constitutional Futures Division.
Cabinet Secretary Angus Robertson.
I refer the member to my answer to question S6O-02021 on the 8th of March. This noted that 24 civil servants, including one Deputy Director, are working in the Constitutional Futures Division. As well as coordinating work on the Government's independence prospectus, officials in the Constitutional Futures Division are contributing to other priority work, including on the retained EU law management programme on devolution policy, on intergovernmental relations and the provision of information for the COVID public inquiries.
Sandesh Gulhani.
The work to prepare independence prospectus papers is being coordinated by the tax-funded Constitutional Futures Division. However, during the SNP leadership contest, Humza Yousaf has admitted that the SNP government's independence prospectus sits on a website and nobody reads it. It's a shocking statement for a potential First Minister to admit that public money is being wasted like this. So does the Minister agree that the tax-funded Constitutional Futures Division must be disbanded immediately, with the approximately £1.5 million being spent elsewhere, perhaps in vaping legislation?
Cabinet Secretary.
So let's just get this right. The position of the Conservative Party is wishes to abolish the part of the civil service that is dealing with retained EU law management, devolution, intergovernmental relations and the provision of information on COVID public inquiries. Is that seriously the position of the Conservative Party? Can I say to the member, if he is genuinely interested in freeing up civil service time, he would be well advised to speak with his Westminster colleagues to ditch or at least ameliorate the retained EU law bill, which is causing an unprecedented and an unnecessary diversion of civil service time.
Question number 7, Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its policy is for the migration strategy in an independent Scotland, including how it would address any workforce and recruitment challenges resulting from the withdrawal from the European Union.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Fiscal Commission forecasts Scotland's working age population will fall by an average of 10,000 a year for at least the next 5 years, with net migration from the European Union lower as a result of Brexit, and the UK Government putting in place a restrictive immigration system that doesn't account for Scotland's needs. Independence would give us the power to design immigration policy tailored to Scotland's needs and return the right to free movement in the European Union. Our approach would seek to attract working-age people and their families to live here and make a positive contribution to our economy and our communities, especially in rural areas.
Jackie Dunbar.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. As international condemnation continues to pour in for the UK Government's atrocious and dehumanising illegal migration bill, the need for the full immigration powers of an independent state has never been clearer. Can the Cabinet Secretary assure Parliament that this Scottish Government will remain committed to Scotland's role as a good global citizen before and after independence?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I agree entirely with my colleague, and although immigration and asylum are entirely reserved to the UK Government, we remain committed to providing support and assistance to all of those seeking safety and sanctuary in Scotland, and will do our utmost to support people to make Scotland their home. With independence, Scotland can leave behind the hostile environment that characterises UK Government policy.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. And before we move to First Minister's questions, I invite members to join me in welcoming to the gallery Ahod Al-Haj Murad Balawag Ibrahim, Chief Minister of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and at question number 1 I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The SNP ferry scandal has damaged our nation's reputation for shipbuilding excellence and has left islanders without vital transport links they need for their everyday lives. This week, Audit Scotland said this: the costs to complete the ferries have continued to escalate. The total cost to taxpayers because of SNP incompetence is now £338 million, 3.5 times more than the original contract of £97 million, and there's still no completion date for the ferries. But Ferguson Marine, fully owned by the SNP government, has paid out bonuses of £87,000 to highly paid chiefs. So very simply, First Minister, what were these bonuses for?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, before I answer these questions, let me remind the Chamber that the Deputy First Minister will make a statement to Parliament this afternoon on these issues and will provide updates in respect of some of these issues. Two issues in response to Douglas Ross's question. Firstly, in respect of the Audit Scotland Section 22 report that was published on Tuesday, we welcome that report and certainly acknowledge the legitimate issues that were raised in it. And as I said, the Deputy First Minister will provide the update requested by the Auditor General this afternoon. That report is critical of the payment of bonuses to senior staff at the Yard in the financial year
2021-22 and the process by which these payments were arrived at. We accept that criticism and can assure Parliament that new arrangements have been put in place, indeed at the Deputy First Minister's request, to ensure that that doesn't arise in the future. The second point from me is in relation to the construction of the ferries. I have said many times, and I say again, we deeply regret the delays to the completion of the ferries and the cost overruns. The management at the yard has, of course, made assessments of the cost of completing the ferries, and Scottish Government officials are applying robust scrutiny to that. But again, the Deputy First Minister will be able to give a further update to Parliament this afternoon.
Douglas Ross. I'm sorry, our standing orders of this Parliament are very clear. If a minister is aware of information that they can provide to Parliament, they should do so. It's not acceptable for the First Minister to say, tune in a couple of hours' time. This is First Minister's questions. As the Leader of the Opposition here in Holyrood, I'm asking about an issue that she must be aware of. So I will ask again, what were these bonuses for? £87,000 of taxpayers' money, as the Deputy First Minister whispers in her ear. I hope he has the answer for the First Minister to give this chamber at First Minister's question. Because the Auditor-General is clear that these bonuses were unacceptable. His words. We think they're downright scandalous. It's indefensible. It's a bonus for failure. And this failure is all on the SNP government. This is a company owned by ministers. They're ultimately in charge of it. So will the SNP government and the First Minister intervene now and demand these bogus bonuses are returned to the taxpayer?
First Minister. Well, Presiding Officer, I'm aware Douglas Ross is rarely interested in listening to the answers to questions, but I am answering the questions. In relation to the bonuses, Audit Scotland issued a Section 22 report that was published on Tuesday, and in that report the Auditor-General is clear that the governance involved in the process that led to these payments was deficient. In other words, it is not possible to be clear about the basis of these bonus payments. These performance payments...
Excuse me, First Minister.
That is why...
First Minister. Sorry, we will hear one another in this chamber at all times with courtesy and respect. Regardless of who's speaking in the chamber, I expect all members to do the courtesy of listening. Thank you.
That indeed is why changes have been put in place, new arrangements have been put in place to ensure that a situation like this doesn't arise again. Of course, there has been changes in the management at the shipyard since the financial year in which these bonuses were paid. So we take seriously and respond in full to the views in the Section 22 report published by the Auditor-General. More generally, as I went on to say, focus continues to be on ensuring the completion of the ferries, and that the Scottish Government applies robust scrutiny to all cost assessments that are issued by the shipyard.
Douglas Ross.
Really? Really? The Scottish Government ensures that they look at all the costs paid by the shipyard. So why can the First Minister not just stand up and tell me, asking the question, and people here in the chamber, and people across Scotland, what was done by the Fat Cats to deserve £87,000 of bonuses? It's a very simple question. Audit Scotland said this week, it is not clear how the performance was assessed, nor were appropriate frameworks and governments in place. These bonuses for failure should not have been allowed, and the First Minister should be able to tell the people of Scotland what they were paid for. And she went on to say there are changes so the situation doesn't arise again. But today, there are reports that the current Chief Executive of Ferguson Marine can get an £82,000 bonus every year, and his contract has no criteria for measuring performance. So once again, Nicola Sturgeon and this government is putting eye-watering sums of public money in jeopardy to be paid to ferry bosses for failure. So, First Minister, why are fat cat bosses getting a single penny before a ferry has been finished?
First Minister.
The issue identified by Audit Scotland is that the process involved in the payment of these bonuses was deficient, and therefore there is not sufficient clarity of the basis in which they were paid. That is the issue that was identified, and the issue that we are seeking to address, so that a situation like this cannot arise in the future. That is the position I have set out, and I'm setting it out clearly, and of course the Deputy First Minister will make a further statement to Parliament later on, where others can question him on that as well. And we remain focused in supporting the shipyard to complete the ferries as quickly as possible. I have said many times before, and I will no doubt say many times again, the delays and the cost overruns are deeply regrettable. But I come back to a point I've also made many times again. We have always been determined to secure the future of that shipyard in order that it can deliver these ferries and have a future that allows those employed at the shipyard to continue to be employed there. So yes, there have been regrettable failings here, which of course the Government is accountable for, but we remain focused on addressing these, and we will continue to do it with that determination and focus.
Douglas Ross. I think it's incredible that the First Minister just accepts us all to be happy that a mistake has happened. We don't know why this money's been paid out, but it is £87,000 of taxpayers' money going into a project that is already 3.5 times over budget. I'm not sure what John Swinney is going to pull out the hat this afternoon, but if it's the same answers, people of Scotland will demand more, because this is our taxpayers' money that is being wasted with no accountability from Nicola Sturgeon or the SNP. So on top of £87,000 of bonuses for failure, CMAL, the ferry agency, has spent almost £100,000 on a PR firm. What a waste of money. No one can put positive spin on this disaster. Speaking this week, Audit Scotland, in their report, said this: there is still no certainty over how much the ferries will cost, when they will be ready, or whether the shipyard has a viable future. Those are the words of the Auditor-General. So as Nicola Sturgeon prepares to sail off into retirement and considers her own legacy, she should reflect on the fact that these ferries have been in construction throughout her time in office, and they remain rusting hulks, and the islanders who rely on them remain without these vital links. So can the people of Scotland get a straight, honest answer from the First Minister for once? When will these ferries be ready, and how much will the total cost be?
First Minister. Well, firstly, going back to the very beginning of that question, if I've learned one thing over recent times in this job, it's never to expect Douglas Ross to be happy about anything. So I'm not sure that is going to change. In terms of the detail of the questions, of course, the estimates for cost and delivery of the ferries are in the public domain. They will be updated as appropriate. The Deputy First Minister will give a further update to Parliament later this afternoon. But of course, Ferguson's have continued to progress with the building of the ferries. For example, the MV Glen Sannock successfully completed a dry docking period at the start of this month. So these milestones continue to be delivered. I am of the view that the failures here are unacceptable. I deeply regret these failures, but that is why it is important that we continue to focus on delivering these ferries and also securing a long-term future for the shipyard. In terms of the Auditor-General's comments about viability, of course, all businesses have to secure long-term viability. The Yard is working to secure commercial opportunities and has already been successful in securing some commercial opportunities, and that of course is part of our priority, to make sure the ferries are completed, but then of course to make sure that Ferguson Shipyard has a long and secure future and continues to employ those whose jobs depend on it.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, yesterday's Tory budget demonstrated whose side they are on. A budget that gave tax breaks to the wealthiest and did nothing to help those most in need. We need a meaningful windfall tax now to scrap the non-dom status and to invest in our communities across the country. That's not possible with this Tory government. And while the Tories do little to address the cost of living crisis across the UK, we have a Scottish government not doing enough to address the NHS crisis here in Scotland. And one key part of our NHS is dentistry. So can the First Minister tell the Chamber what proportion of dental practices are now refusing to take new NHS patients?
First Minister.
I don't have that figure immediately to hand. I can provide it. But what I do know is that over 1.6 million NHS examination appointments were completed between April and October, with an average of more than 300,000 courses of treatment per month, meaning I think we're on course for over 3.5 million contacts over the course of this financial year. Clearly there are pressures on NHS dentistry, as there are pressures on all parts of the National Health Service, and we continue to support the dentistry profession as we continue to support the NHS as a whole.
I should have declared an interest, of course, that my wife and I are both qualified dentists. And Nicola Sturgeon may not know this, but I do, and my wife does, that actually you're meant to get a dental check-up every 6 months if you're a citizen across the country. So those figures aren't good enough. And data obtained through Freedom of Information request shows that just 1 in 5 dental practices are taking on new patients. 1 in 5. And in 4 health boards in areas in Scotland, 0 practices are taking on new NHS patients. 0. And we know who suffers when dentistry is cut back. Children, the most deprived, and families forced to go private. Almost 1 in 10 children have severe decay or an abscess, up significantly since 2020. And in fact, dental extractions under general anaesthetic are the most common reason for children to be admitted to hospital. I've worked in our NHS. I was a dentist in Paisley, and I saw firsthand the impact of this government's failures on the poorest communities in our country. So surely the First Minister knows, as I know and NHS staff across the country know, that this Health Secretary is incompetent and out of his depth.
First Minister.
NHS dentistry, of course, is under pressure. All parts of the NHS are under pressure. I won't repeat the statistics I gave in my first answer, but we have worked to incentivise NHS dentistry. We're in the course of abolishing dental charges, starting with young people, and I'll come back to youngest people and dental health in a moment. But if you look at some other statistics and comparisons, we have in Scotland 57 dentists per 100,000 of our population providing NHS dental services. That compares with just 43 per 100,000 south of the border. 50.4% of adult patients were seen by an NHS dentist in the last 24 months, 50.4% compared to just 38.2% in England. And of course, the latest figures show that over 95% of the Scottish population are registered with an NHS dentist. Just over a third of adults and less than half of children, compared to that 95% in Scotland, have access to an NHS dentist in England. So yes, under pressure, but a solid foundation there. Finally, in terms of child oral health, in recent years we have seen very significant improvements in child oral health in Scotland. So the first year of the National Dental Inspection Programme in 2002, Anna Sarwar should be aware of this, showed that 45% of primary 1 children had no obvious decay experience. In 2021-22, that figure had increased from 45% with no obvious decay to 73%. That's the improvement we're seeing in child oral health. So yes, there are challenges, but we continue to support the dental profession to meet those challenges head-on.
Anna Sarwar.
Look, I welcome free dentistry, but you need dentists in order to get the treatment across Scotland, and the First Minister is clearly not listening to the profession. But now, rather than confronting the NHS crisis, we have an SNP talking to themselves about themselves. In fact, it seems the only things missing from this SNP leadership election is an Ash Regan press conference outside the Four Seasons, or maybe a Saltire waving Stop the Seal rally by Kate Forbes outside Holyrood. And meanwhile, the machine candidate, the incompetent Humza Yousaf, is presiding over chaos in Scotland's NHS. This morning, we heard a mother on BBC Radio Scotland saying her son, who is about to start school, has never seen a dentist despite years of trying. Never seen a dentist. And he will be one of many. And the British Dental Association have told us the number of dentists in our communities has fallen, despite what Nicola Sturgeon claims. And they also tell us 59% of Scottish dentists have reduced the amount of NHS work since lockdown, and 83% of dentists plan to reduce NHS services further in the year ahead. In their words, it is very clear an exodus is in motion. The Health Secretary has lost the confidence of dentists and patients. He has lost the confidence of the SNP Finance Secretary. Surely even Nicola Sturgeon can see that Scotland has no confidence in him and he's not up to the top job.
First Minister.
Well, ultimately, of course, it's the Scottish people who will make these judgments, and the record of past years is one that
thank you,
that I know terrifies Anna Sarwar. But come back to NHS dentistry, because Anna Sarwar rightly talks about the importance of access to NHS dentistry. So let me just repeat the figures showing the reality. Elsewhere in the UK, just over a third of adults and less than half of children have access to an NHS dentist. That's the position in England. In Scotland, the figure is more than 95%. 95% of our population are registered with an NHS dentist. That's access to dentistry. We've got more dentists per head of population than other parts of the UK, and significant progress has been made on improving child oral health. So yes, there are pressures. Yes, there are challenges, but these statistics show that we are meeting those challenges and we will continue to do so.
Question number 3, Ariane Burgess.
To ask the First Minister, ahead of the publication of the next report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change next week, what the Scottish Government is doing to ensure that Scotland plays a leading role in tackling the global climate emergency.
First Minister.
I look forward to the publication of the next IPCC report. I certainly hope it leads to accelerated action to tackle the climate emergency on a global scale. The Scottish Government is, and it's important that it continues to take action, both here at home but also working to support the global effort to tackle climate change. Earlier this week I chaired a Cabinet subcommittee focused on, firstly, our response to the recent Committee on Climate Change report, and also looking at progress towards the update of our climate change action plan.
Ariane Burgess.
I thank the First Minister for her answer. Scotland's history of heavy industry means that we have a significant responsibility to tackle climate change, the greatest challenge we face this century. We've also shown how we can lead from the front in transforming energy supply to a clean, green, renewable future. So does the First Minister agree with me that this decade is one of crucial choices, for example, on standards of homes and buildings, on transport patterns, on what we farm and how we use land, and that it is those areas that our future lies in, not squeezing more fossil fuels out of new oil fields like Rosebank and Jackdaw?
First Minister.
Yes, I do agree that this decade is a critical one if the world is to avert what will otherwise be the catastrophic impacts of climate change. Indeed, the issues that the member highlights, for example, how we decarbonise the heating of our homes, further decarbonise transport, were exactly the issues we were discussing at the Cabinet subcommittee that I referred to and that I chaired earlier this week. So the Scottish Government is focused on making sure that we take the action necessary. The member is right to point out that countries like ours that have done the most to cause climate change and have benefited from emissions down the generations now have a particular responsibility to take action to combat climate change. And that undoubtedly includes the transition away from fossil fuels to clean, renewable sources of energy, and that is important for Scotland. It's important for Scotland in the context of the climate emergency, but of course the North Sea is a declining basin, so it is important for other reasons as well. But it's also important that that transition is a just one, which is why our work on just transition is so important as well.
Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Well, what a litany of utter complacency we've just heard in that question and response. In fact, the Scottish Government's response to the climate emergency shows 7 out of 11 legal emissions targets missed, 11 out of 20 biodiversity targets missed, 6 out of 8 key environmental milestones missed, and annual peatland restoration targets missed. So, after almost 9 years of failing to get a grip on the climate emergency, does the First Minister believe that all 1 or none of the candidates to succeed her will do a better job than she has?
First Minister.
Recognised across the world as being a leader in tackling climate change, and rightly so. And it's particularly notable that we have done that, achieved that leadership status in the teeth of knee-jerk, opportunistic opposition from the Conservatives to almost every proposal we put forward. Their hypocrisy is breathtaking. Because when we look at the proposals we've brought forward to try to encourage people to travel to work in ways other than in their cars, or to recycle bottles and cans, for example, what do we get from the Tories? We get nothing but opposition. But we'll continue to tackle climate change with or without the help of the Scottish Conservative Party.
Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We all want Scotland to play a leading role in tackling the global climate and nature emergencies. Does the First Minister agree with me that the global campaign to establish a law of ecocide, a mission started by the respected Polly Higgins, the late Polly Higgins, who was a barrister and environmental campaigner, is an important campaign and is rightly building momentum across Europe and around the world? Will she join me in encouraging people to support that campaign, and will she encourage her government to continue to engage with me and the campaigners to explore how we can bring this into criminal law in Scotland?
First Minister.
Yes, in principle I do, and I would pay tribute to campaigners across many issues in the fight against climate change for the work that they do. I think it is important that we continue to increase our efforts given the scale of the challenge that we face. So I will encourage the government that comes after mine to continue to do all of these things, and to do them bravely, and to do them despite the opposition that will come from the Scottish Conservatives. And I would hope other parties across the chamber will work with the government to make sure that we are meeting these important obligations.
Question number 4, Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the UK Government's spring budget.
First Minister.
While any limited additional money for the Scottish Government's budget is welcome, it does not go nearly far enough. We have repeatedly called on the UK Government to deploy its full range of powers to support people, the public sector and businesses through the cost of living crisis, and the Chancellor's budget yesterday was, disappointingly, another missed opportunity to do that. The decisions announced yesterday mean that this Government will continue to have a constrained ability to support vital services and provide fair pay rises. This Government is doing everything it can within its limited powers to ensure people receive the help needed, but the UK could have done far more to ease the burden affecting so many. And of course that demonstrates yet again why Scotland does need the full powers of independence.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the First Minister for that reply. The Office for Budget Responsibility says UK household disposable income will fall by 5.7% this year and next, the largest two-year fall since records began in 1957. Does the First Minister agree that this damp squib of a budget goes nowhere near addressing the true scale of the cost of living crisis, was a missed opportunity to support households struggling to meet eye-watering energy costs, rising again as the Chancellor ends the £67 monthly payment many households have relied on since October, provides no help to businesses struggling with acute skills and labour shortages, and that an independent, energy-rich Scotland would invest in carbon capture, ignored by the UK for a decade, reform broken energy markets and cut costs for households and businesses alike?
First Minister.
I absolutely agree with Kenny Gibson. Firstly, he's right to point to the economic forecast, but let's look at what the experts had to say yesterday. The IFS, the OBR, may be more positive about inflation in the economy, but it's still projecting that 2022 and 2023 will see the biggest ever fall in living standards. Or the Resolution Foundation, the economic outlook is better than previously feared, but it's still very bad. This is on course to be the worst Parliament on record for living standards by a country mile. That's the Conservative responsibility and the Conservative record. Kenny Gibson also raised carbon capture, and can I say how deeply disappointed this Government was yesterday that we had no further clarity on a timeline for the deployment of the Scottish cluster. We were expecting further clarity. We had been given assurances, I had been given assurances directly by the Prime Minister that further clarity would be forthcoming, so it's doubly disappointing that we didn't get that yesterday. The Deputy First Minister will be writing to the UK Government setting out that disappointment and frustration, and of course we'll make sure that letter is published.
Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yesterday, the Chancellor announced the introduction of 30 hours of free childcare from 9 months old. This has the potential to truly transform childcare by supporting parents and giving our children the best possible start in life. I've been contacted by mums across Scotland who think this is a wonderful policy. Does the First Minister agree with me that the Scottish Government should match this major commitment by extending its current childcare policy?
Well, of course, if the Scottish Government was to match the UK Government on early years education and childcare, we'd have to reduce the provision that is currently available in Scotland. Because we are already way ahead of anything the UK Government provides because of the doubling under this Government of early years education and childcare for 3- and 4-year-olds and eligible 2-year-olds. Of course, we want to go further, and we're clear about this at the last election, for younger children. But we want to make sure that an important principle in our provision is also respected about the universal approach, because what was announced yesterday by the Chancellor is very, very limited. And to give an indication of how limited, the consequentials in the forthcoming financial year from that commitment to the Scottish Government amount to just around £20 million. That tells its own story about how, despite the spin, what the UK Government is proposing here is very, very limited. Our ambition remains very much higher.
Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Swimming pools across Scotland are currently facing closure, including the leisure pool in Perth, where I live. Yesterday, in the budget statement, the Chancellor announced a £63 million fund for swimming pools in England. Will the Scottish Government use the Barnett consequentials that will arise from that extra money to support swimming pools here in Scotland, currently facing closure?
First Minister.
No, I'm not sure, Presiding Officer, whether Murdo Fraser's ever been invited to use the Prime Minister's personal swimming pool. But if he hasn't, I'm sure that invitation will be forthcoming. On the issue of swimming pools, local sport and leisure facilities include. Douglas Ross seems a bit sensitive about the Prime Minister's private swimming pool. Maybe he hasn't had an invitation either. Local sport.
Thank you all.
I'm perhaps amused by the Leader of the Opposition rather than the issue, Presiding Officer. Local sport and leisure facilities, including swimming pools, are vital in supporting both the physical and mental health of people across the country. Of course, energy costs have been a very significant issue facing many sports facilities, particularly swimming pools, over recent times. We will continue to support local councils with the best possible financial settlements, and in terms of the use of consequentials, of course, that will be a matter for the incoming First Minister and his or her Cabinet.
Question number 5, Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government has made any assessment of the effect that long A&E waiting times has on patient mortality.
First Minister.
Well, I think everyone accepts that there is a link between long waits and increased risk of harm. That is why we remain committed to delivering improved A&E performance. In 2018 in NHS England, the Emergency Medicine Getting It Right First Time programme carried out an analysis of the relationship between time spent in emergency departments and patient harm. That analysis proved association but not causation. We considered that analysis very closely, and we will continue to monitor research and analysis into the relationship between time spent in emergency departments and patient harm. But of course we remain focused on ensuring we reduce waits in accident and emergency.
First Minister, new figures have revealed that an estimated 765 people died due to dangerously long A&E waiting times last year. That means 64 patients dying needlessly, leaving behind 64 grieving families, each and every month under this SNP government. The First Minister has less than 2 weeks left in the job, so she has no need to deflect, dissemble or distract attention by shifting the blame. So will she now, therefore, take this opportunity to apologise to the families of those patients who died and say sorry for her government's appalling legacy on the Scottish NHS?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, We accept, and everybody should accept, that long waits lead to poorer outcomes. That is why we focus on reducing A&E waiting times, and it's why we have worked so hard to ensure that we continue to have the best performing accident and emergency waiting time departments anywhere in the UK. Let's put some context on this. Of course, the Royal College of Emergency Medicine has made estimates about Scotland, but it is also estimated that in 2022 there were over 23,000 excess deaths in A&E linked to long waits in England. That's proportionately 3 times higher than the estimate for Scotland.
Sorry, excuse me, members. First Minister, sorry, can I ask that members do not continue to contribute while people are asking questions or responding to them? Thank you.
That is why it is vital that we continue to reduce waits and long waits in particular in A&E. And in recent weeks, not only have we been seeing an improvement in accident and emergency waiting times, but we've seen a reduction in the longest waits, those waiting over 8 hours and 12 hours, and we will remain focused on securing these improvements.
Paul O'Kane.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. These are people who have died that we are talking about. In the final quarter of 2022, excess deaths in Scotland rose by almost 10% above the 5-year average, meaning that an additional 1,433 people died than would have been expected based on historical trends. Each death a tragedy, but they're not a statistical coincidence. They are evidence of widening health inequalities, the normalisation of 12 hours waiting in A&E, and a failure to increase cancer diagnosis rates. This is the heartbreaking reality of Humza Yousaf's disastrous record as Health Secretary, and it will be the legacy of this First Minister. So I'd ask her, why has she allowed the NHS to decline into such a state of perpetual crisis? And does she agree with clinicians, staff, patients and indeed her Finance Secretary Kate Forbes that Humza Yousaf shouldn't be anywhere near running our health service?
First Minister.
Every one of these numbers is a human being, and it's important that it is treated in that way, which is why when the member goes on to politicise in the way he has done, I think he kind of undermines his own argument in that. The comparisons are important only because if we listen to questions like that, the suggestion is that the situation in our National Health Service in Scotland is somehow unique and that it is all down to whoever the Health Secretary is or the fact that we have an SNP government. The reason I make these comparisons is for context. Health services everywhere are dealing with these challenges. The biggest challenge, of course, in recent years being a global pandemic that has caused many of these pressures. But that is why it is so important that we are a government that has supported and continues to support record investment, record numbers of people working in our National Health Service. We're now seeing improvements in waiting times. We want to see these improvements go further and faster, but we've seen a reduction in those waiting for the longest periods of time in accident and emergency departments. So this is the hard work of government, and this government, under new leadership in coming weeks, albeit, but this government will remain focused on doing the hard work and repaying the trust that the people of Scotland have placed in us.
Question number 6, Colin McNeill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government will provide police with access to all correspondence, transcripts, meeting notes and other communications with ministers, its officials, with the Scottish Prison Service to assist with the investigation regarding the Alan Marshall case.
First Minister.
Well, firstly, Presiding Officer, my thoughts and condolences, of course, remain with the family of Alan Marshall. The former Justice Secretary met with him personally following the fatal accident inquiry determination. There is, of course, now a live police investigation underway, so it would be inappropriate for me or anyone else in the Scottish Government to comment on that investigation. But I will, of course, confirm that the Scottish Government will cooperate fully with any investigation undertaken by Police Scotland.
Pauline McNeill.
Since I first read of the death of Alan Marshall, who died in March 2015 as a result of injuries sustained 4 days earlier whilst being held in remand at HMP Edinburgh, I did vow to do all I can for Alan's family. First Minister will know that the CCTV footage from the prison showed that Alan was dragged naked by the feet face down along a corridor by 13 prison officers. The officers involved were given immunity from prosecution. In the 8 long years since his death, Alan's family have been waiting for the answers. Press reports indicate that some of the prison officers were branded consistently dishonest at the inquiry, but were able to retire on full pensions without any strain on their service. The independent review into the response to deaths in prison custody that was discussed recently in this Parliament recommended that families should have unfettered access to information about a death in custody. Now, I wonder if the First Minister agrees that this is a shocking episode in Scottish justice, and that, of course, it's a matter for the Lord Advocate. I fully appreciate that. But does the First Minister agree with me that future Lord Advocates need to look at the outcome of this case and the mistakes in this case before granting immunity in the future? And I call on the Government, I think they have said they'll do this, to implement in full the recommendations of the independent review into deaths in custody.
First Minister.
I'll point back to the comment I made earlier on. There is a live police investigation, so it is appropriate that I am careful in what I say in order that nothing I say could possibly prejudice any ongoing investigation. But I do absolutely understand the sentiment expressed. I watched the full CCTV coverage. My heart goes out to the family of Alan Marshall, and I absolutely understand the concern that was raised by that. Decisions around prosecution or immunity from prosecution are rightly and properly in our democracy for independent prosecutors, and it would be wrong for me as a politician to seek to second guess that. But there is now, of course, an investigation underway. In relation to the wider point, and I think it is a point very well made, the independent review of deaths in custody was important, and it is now vital that is taken forward. The Scottish Government is making progress on recommendations, including the proposal for an independent investigation into every death in custody. So, in answer to the question Pauline McNeill asked, should lessons be learned from this case to inform future decisions? Of course that is the case, but that must be done in the proper way and in line with due process. But I absolutely understand the concerns that have been raised in association with this case, and I hope the processes underway will help to give further, if not comfort, then some degree of assurance and in time consolation to Alan Marshall's family.
Okay. We move to general and constituency supplementaries, and I call Graeme Simpson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will recall that in October last year, I asked her to consider introducing baby loss certificates for parents who have experienced a pregnancy or baby loss prior to 24 weeks. And this week, she announced that this will happen this summer, along with the introduction of a memorial book. And of course, that's been welcomed by parents and charities, including Baby Loss Retreat, whose shop I opened in Airdrie. So I want to thank the First Minister and ask if she can be more specific about when it will happen and what the process will be for getting a certificate.
First Minister.
This initiative will begin this summer. I will ask that further information is provided near the time about the specific date for that, and I will ask that some information is shared with MSPs about the particular process. Some detail of that was shared earlier this week when we announced the initiative. For example, there will be no need for medical evidence for people who apply for either an entry in the memorial book or a certificate, and that is important. This should be as easy a process as possible for bereaved parents. I think this is a really important step forward. I won't again go into detail. People are aware of it. This is something that I think is absolutely the right thing to do for the country. It's something that is important to me personally, and I hope it does bring some comfort and consolation to those who lose babies before 24 weeks in the future, but also to some who have suffered that loss in the past. And I know from many of the comments that have been made in response to the announcement this week that is the case. But I will ensure that further information is shared, and that as that develops over the period until this initiative is launched, we will continue to share as much as possible.
Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister may be aware of a recent decision taken by North Lanarkshire Council to downgrade early years workers, predominantly women, from grade 9 to grade 7, a significant drop in income of up to £10,000 in some cases. I've been contacted by many of these workers, terrified of the impact these changes will have especially in the grip of a cost of living crisis. They also feel let down and undervalued. Does the First Minister agree with me that early years workers are an absolute cornerstone of our education system, and can she outline the Scottish Government's ongoing commitment to this sector? And will she join me and my North Lanarkshire constituency MSP colleagues in calling for Labour-controlled North Lanarkshire to reverse this decision and sit down with workers and unions to find a solution?
First Minister.
I very much agree with Fulton McGregor that early learning and childcare workers are a cornerstone of our education system. Indeed, we could not have delivered the landmark expansion to 1,140 hours of funded early learning and childcare without them. The Scottish Government fully funds councils to deliver 1,140 hours of high-quality early learning and childcare to all eligible children, with around £1 billion of investment each year. It is, of course, for councils to make decisions about funding and workforce to meet their statutory duties on provision in their area. I do appreciate that the proposed changes in North Lanarkshire are causing real concerns for early learning and childcare staff. I understand that the Council is working with staff and trade unions to find solutions for those affected by the proposed changes, but I would certainly encourage the Councils and all parties to continue to work together to identify a positive way forward.
Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister promised a new national treatment centre for Cumbernauld in 2021. That was supposed to treat its first patient in 2026. FOI requests have said that that will now not happen until 2028 at the very earliest, and even that is, and I quote, is challenging. So can the First Minister say when our government will deliver on the promise made back in 2021 and start seeing my constituents in Cumbernauld who are currently languishing on NHS waiting lists?
First Minister.
Well, we continue to keep the whole programme under review to make sure that we deliver all of these new centres as quickly as possible. Of course, the context is very challenging, with high inflation leading to higher construction costs. But there are 4 national treatment centres opening in the coming year. I hope that I may get the opportunity to open one before leaving office, and they will provide significant additional surgeries and procedures. These 4 new centres in NHS 5, NHS Forth Valley, NHS Highland and the second phase of the Golden Jubilee are going to make a significant contribution to the NHS recovery plan, and the other centres, as I say, we keep under review to ensure that they are delivered as quickly as possible despite the challenging circumstances we face.
Co-Cap Stewart.
Thank you. The UN Refugee Agency has condemned it. International charities are horrified by it, and the EU Commission is scathing of it, and it may indeed be in violation of continental-wide European Convention on Human Rights. Does the First Minister agree that the UK Government's illegal migration bill has no place in an open and internationalist Scotland that we in this Parliament are seeking to build?
First Minister.
Yes, I do agree with that wholeheartedly. This Scottish Government, like many other people, has condemned what is a cruel and inhumane bill, and we continue to urge the UK Government to scrap it. It is beyond me how Douglas Ross could have voted for that bill in the House of Commons earlier this week. I think it is incumbent on all of us to demonstrate respect for international law, human rights and social justice in offering protection with humane, fair and compassionate refugee and asylum policies, and I certainly hope and expect that is exactly what an independent Scotland would be able to do. During this week, this Scottish Government extended funding for a Women in Conflict Fellowship, and at the same time the UK Government pressed forward with a bill that would see the rights of women subject to trafficking and sexual exploitation taken away and children subject to detention. No one with any moral conscience should support legislation that, in line with international law, against international law, removes offering a place of safety to desperate people fleeing conflict and persecution.
Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I know from your own contributions you will be aware that this week is Sign Language Week. The First Minister will be as relieved as I am. I'll finish the rest of the question in English. Thank you to our wonderful parliamentary interpreters. I wonder if the First Minister would join me in raising awareness of British Sign Language, acknowledging its distinctness as a language in its own right, both here in Scotland and right across the UK, sharing the same equal status as Welsh and Scots Gaelic, for example. This year's Sign Language Week theme is protecting BSL. So will the First Minister and the whole Parliament join me in helping to promote, to protect and educate people about BSL, and in doing so encourage more people to start learning this beautiful, unique and visual language so we can truly protect and preserve BSL for many future generations to come, and in doing so also join me in thanking the many interpreters in this Parliament who help us.
First Minister.
I do agree, and let me take the opportunity to echo those sentiments entirely. BSL is a distinctive language in its own right. It is a beautiful language and visually distinctive, as the member has said, and I'm proud that this Parliament has recognised the status of it, and that is absolutely appropriate. I think we could all do more to raise awareness of it. Perhaps we could all do more to learn the language, and perhaps now that I might have a bit more time, that's a commitment I'm prepared to make here today. Can I just take the opportunity, in agreeing with everything that Jamie Green has said, to thank some BSL interpreters, without whom I couldn't have done my job over the past few years. Everybody will recall during the COVID briefings, the BSL interpreters that were there present with me every single day. They were crucial in making sure that we were able to communicate properly and fully the public health messages that were so essential to keeping the country safe during that time. So that is just one example of the value of BSL. I want to thank them for that, for all users of the language and interpreters of the language, and let us all make a resolution that we will do more to raise awareness of it for the interests of the inclusive country that I think all of us are proud to live in.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a member's business debate in the name of Gillian Martin, and there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and public gallery to do so before the debate begins.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.